keep you too long. I know we're coming up on the holiday here, but Michael Bump, Dr. Michael Bump. I appreciate you doing this, joining me today. And you're my first podcast back after a while. It's been probably 3 or 4 months since I've done one, for various reasons. But I'm really glad to get to talk to you today. You're someone who, whether you know it or not, is somebody who's very important in my life, in terms of like my formative years as a student, and sort of entering into the world of professional percussion playing. And we can get into all that, and you can tell some stories if you want. But I'm curious, before we do that, if you wouldn't mind giving me the nickel and dime tour of, like, tell me about Baby Michael Bump. Like, what got you into playing percussion? In particular, I know, like, for me, steel drums is my science project. Like, that's the thing growing in the fridge when no one's looking. But like timpani playing for you has been something that lodged in my brain from day one. I was like, man, this guy is bonkers about timpani. And I'm curious if you could sort of lead me down the path a little bit of what brought you to that. And that's a very vague question, so start wherever you feel comfortable.
Yeah, that is true, I guess, about timpani, isn't it? But so it goes back to, I mean, you and I share many commonalities, one of them being Cleveland. I was born and raised in Cleveland, and North Olmsted, actually, on the west side. So it really starts, in terms of interest in percussion and such. It starts with my grandfather. Actually, it goes back further than that, I guess. It goes back to Tuesday nights at 7 o'clock, ABC, the Monkees. I was fanatical about watching the Monkees, and specifically watching every move that Mickey Dolenz made on that show. And I wanted to do what he did. I wanted to be a monkey, basically. So my grandfather picked up on that, and he was one who a lot of our family have stories of, many of which I don't know, but the ones I do know is he was lead cameraman for the Ed Sullivan Show, and he was lead cameraman when the Beatles came.
So hold up a second. Your grandfather, am I hearing this correctly? Your grandfather was the lead cameraman on the Ed Sullivan Show when the Beatles did their like U.S. premiere.
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. Yeah. He was the lead cameraman, and the story goes from family is that he was trying to get sound checks or camera spots, I guess, with all his camera colleagues on the set. And he couldn't talk to them back and forth. He couldn't communicate because the Beatles, the guys were doing sound check and playing a little bit on stage before the show, and he couldn't communicate. So he went up to Ringo, apparently, and he asked them if they could hold off for a few minutes while he gets his camera guys spotted. And Ringo didn't stop playing. He just kept going with it. And my grandfather got really frustrated, and he finally got him to stop. And he didn't know Ringo again didn't know what my grandfather said, so he thought he wanted an autograph. So he scribbled something on a piece of paper and gave it to my grandfather, which was his autograph at that time. And my grandfather was so pissed that he just crumpled it up and threw it away. So it was that sort of story, that lives in our minds, all of our family's minds. And he has many other stories to tell, but as eccentric as he was, he did inspire me to want to play drums, or at least picked up on that. So he ended up buying a set of drums for me at a garage sale in Cleveland, and which was great. And I had my first set of drums. They were a Rogers Holiday Red Sparkle 4-piece set, and so I didn't really know what I was doing, but I took some lessons from a guy that was at a music store at a strip mall in Great Northern Shopping Center in North Olmsted. And I went there every Saturday, and my mom took me there and started learning the ropes, learning the basics. And it was years later that actually I started taking more formally, more seriously lessons from Jared Spears, who was a big influence in my life very early on, junior high and high school age. And many people might know Jared Spears as a composer of record for percussion, but mainly, graded literature
Hmm.
But he's written a plethora of things with emphasis on percussion, of course, as well as great band literature.
Hmm.
But he was one of my earliest influences, and so from there, I mean, it went to undergraduate work at Memphis State University. This
Well,
was like,
sorry to interrupt. Is it okay if I call you Michael, or do you want me to call you Doctor Bump? You say the word, I'll do it. I'll follow your
man,
lead.
you can call me anything except late for dinner. Okay,
Well,
that's because you and
sorry
I
to
know each other too well,
well, I'm
so
sorry to
it's all
interrupt
good.
you, and I apologize for talking over you with the delay here. But before we get into your sort of college stuff, like, what did your mom and remind me again if I'm and sorry if I missed it. What did your mom and dad do for a living?
Well, mom was a nurse.
Hmm.
She was a RN in the greater Cleveland area.
Hmm.
In fact, we're speaking of Cleveland here. She was the nurse for the team doctor of the tribe back from 1970
Uh-huh.
to 73.
Oh wow.
Yeah, speaking of things. So I was thinking about that just now. But Dad was a lithographer. He was a printer for William Feather Company
Hmm.
in Cleveland, in Midtown area, and yeah, that's what
So,
they did.
I
The,
mean,
the, the,
so, um, and again, I'm gleaning information here. So if I'm off the mark, tell me. But like, so you're there was art in your house. Your dad was a photographer, so there was somebody with an artistic mindset. And I think, and your mom being a nurse, like, I'm curious, was there anybody in your did you ever mom and dad ever sit you down and be like, all right, listen, seems like you're taking this pretty seriously. What are you doing? What are we doing here? Like, this is, this is a generation again. Like, this is a
yeah,
generation of parents who maybe, or certainly older than my generation, but babies of World War II parents, where like the concerns in society were just different than they are now. It's not so weird for a kid to be like, I want to play drums for a living and go study at college. But in your time, things that wasn't as accepted. And so, was there any? What were the conversations like in your house around that stuff?
well, you got that right. I mean, we did have the talk,
Hmm. Hmm.
about being in the arts. I guess, or taking it seriously. I think, and that happened during my early undergraduate years, and that when we had moved to Memphis right before undergraduate work.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that's how the connection with Memphis State happened. But Dad took a new job with Holiday and Press at that time.
Okay.
So we went down there, and yeah. So I mean, I started at Memphis State, got a band scholarship, so that helped financially, and but I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I didn't declare a music major. But I was taking
Oh,
lessons and
were
lots
you
of
were you
things.
just undeclared as a major?
Yeah, I came in
Okay.
undeclared, but I had this band scholarship, which was great. So I was in marching band and took private lessons with Frank Schaefer, which is a dear influence in my life as well. And took theory. I took music theory, and I was in the wind symphony and percussion ensemble. I kept my hands in all of this stuff, but I shied away from officially declaring a major in music because I was feeling that heat, from the family a little bit about, you might want to, just wait it out and feel things out a little bit. Consider the undergraduate experience as a cafeteria. So just kind of, see what's out there.
Hmm.
So I did after a while, I declared a major in architectural engineering and then
Hmm.
got a little, not a little disinterested in that, acoustical engineering, acoustical sciences, pre-veterinary science,
Wow. Well,
business marketing, the whole 9 yards, man. I mean,
you were sort
I
of all
was
over
all
the
over the
map.
map,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it wasn't until my junior year. I mean, all the while I was doing music, sort of dabbling and staying in it, but under I guess it was my junior year, Christmas actually. My grandfather again came down. He was with us for Christmas that year, asking the typical questions that you would ask. So, how's life at the university? And what are you studying? What are you doing? And my answers were, oh, we had a great wind symphony concert, and we did this piece and that piece. And on percussion, I'm just doing this, and I'm studying this piece, and I'm learning how to do this and that with formality technique, and what it was just great. And he said, yeah, but so what are you doing with your major? And I said, well, it's okay. I'm in marketing right now, and it's okay. I'm learning things. And I can remember him so vividly. He just like shook his head and kind of like did that to me. He says, don't regret waking up one day at 62, what you do for a living.
Hmm. Hmm.
Find what you love, do it. You'll figure it out. You'll
Hmm.
figure it out. He said, so don't regret it and don't do it just for the money. Don't listen to everybody else about, oh, it's got to be about the money. He
Mm-hmm,
said,
mm-hmm,
you'll find security in the things that you love if you truly invest your heart and soul in it.
mm-hmm.
And, as naive and arrogant as I was at that time in my life, I still took that one to heart. So in January, I marched over to the counselor's office, changed my major to music, and that was that. Never looked back.
And so one
So,
after after that stage, I mean, I'm always, for myself personally, but also for like students who look at people they look up to, their current teachers, people who are playing in the field, and they think that this stuff sort of happens overnight, and that like mindsets change, and all of a sudden, yesterday you were that Michael Bump, and now today you're Michael Bump, the music major. It's like, well, yeah, on paper, but what did you actually physically do differently moving forward from that day? Like, how did stuff click differently for you after you sort of were like, now I'm officially a music major? You walk out of that office and like, actually, Michael, nothing's changed. You've just signed a piece of paper, like so.
yeah, really.
How did you move then to the next day and the next day after that? What did you do differently?
I just accepted my own reality, man. Well, I mean, because what I was doing the whole time up into my junior year, when I had that conversation with my grandfather,
Mm-hmm.
is I was invested in the music environment there. I mean, I was subbing for Memphis Symphony at that time in the opera, as a non-major, as an undeclared, just because it was fun. I enjoyed doing it, and my teacher asked me to do things like that. Got involved with drum and bugle corps, Memphis Blues at that time. So I started, playing and writing and arranging. But I was always thinking about this as a sideline, something that was just fun to do and a hobby and that sort of thing. But nothing that my parents or family would ever agree to.
Well, it
So
was
I just,
also.
I
I'm sorry to interrupt. I mean, it was also too at that time. I mean, again, I'm trying not to be like, you walked uphill both in the snow both ways each day, with no shoes on sort of vibe. But like, there are just more people now for my generation of students to look to be like, oh wait, Colin Curry, you can play concertos for a living. Like when I was a student, Evelyn Glennie was the only one. And then if you wanted to
right,
look to percussion ensembles, Nexus was like the only other group really that was in the US anyway, in Canada, that was touring regularly, that was like in our consciousness of like a possibility. Then you start to learn about Kremada and Amadinda and other
right,
groups later, but again, this was all pre-internet. Like I didn't know who Amadinda was until I met them at PASIC, and I was like, "Who's that big guy from Hungary? Like, with a big hole in his shoe?
yeah,
Like." And but for you at that time, it's not like you woke up every day and was just like, there's just countless percussionists out there like doing this for a living. It wasn't an obvious thing, and so like but knowing where your path led you, like what propelled you into teaching, like getting figuring that out and getting ending up teaching at the university level.
it was a lot of just I want to. I want to take this more seriously. It was that point that, my grandfather said, you'll figure it out. And that sentence just kept, looping in my head. You'll figure it out. You'll figure it out. Do what you love. And,
Mm-hmm.
I never really thought about that in a serious mode in terms of something I could make a career out of. But when he said that, I believed him. I believed him, and so I just changed my attitude about it being a secondary element of my life to being a primary element of my life,
Mm-hmm.
and immersed myself and went for it. At that particular point. But it wasn't like I hadn't been doing it all along. I just accepted my own reality. Like I said, I knew what I was doing all along. I just looked at it in a different light. So that was great. I'm glad he said that. Um, yeah, I mean, in terms of everything, I didn't really have a clear direction in terms of music, what I wanted to do. I didn't know exactly what the career would look like, how it would crystallize, things like that. I admired Frank for being a university teacher, and it looked like a really great gig. He was able to synthesize that with his principal chair as timpanist with the Memphis Symphony and the opera. And, I was picking up gigs with them along the way too. And I thought this could be really cool. I like this. I'm actually, getting paid to do it too, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
But I like the vibe. I loved stepping out on stage and, feeling that energy, feeling that heat.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to just keep doing that. Um, so yeah, the orchestra thing was an attraction initially, and I guess because Frank was a timpanist, I became more and more interested in timpani. I started writing and composing works for solo timpani. I started thinking about the instrument as not solely as the role of accompaniment, as a voice of accompaniment, but what's the potential of this instrument becoming a solo vehicle?
Hmm.
Here's one of the oldest instruments that we gravitate towards, that we concentrate and we study and perform, but
Hmm.
yet it remains sort of an infant stuck in time.
Hmm.
This voice of accompaniment with the orchestra situation, and people seem to just accept that image, that role. And I thought, there's got to be more to it than this. The potential of this instrument is beyond this. I just feel it. I know it is. And
Hmm.
I met John Haas when I was still an undergrad, and he was already starting to dabble in this idea a little bit.
Hmm.
So we started to talk a lot more, and we became very good friends about it. He was commissioning um, uh, composers, in the area, in the New York area and the East Coast, and making some things happen. Andrew Thomas and the like.
Hmm.
So, I thought, well, I don't know any composers. I don't know that, I don't have that sense of connection. And he's a little older than I am, I guess, but um, maybe I can write some things, because I've always
Hmm.
written things and composed as simple as they might have been at that time.
Hmm.
So I did. I just started writing pieces and putting them out there and then performing them. And some people thought it was cool. Some people probably thought it was ridiculous, but that's all right. But I ended up having a voice, and finding a voice, and that was propelling me forward. That was energizing for me.
You're one of the. You were the first. You never actually, I don't think, vocalized it specifically, but you were somebody who one of the early teachers I had that sort of demonstrated that idea of like, yeah, no, like you need to learn how to have a snare drum roll and Porgy and Bess is important and all those things, but like I also have this thing that I do when the door's shut and no one's looking. I love this thing. And it's this weird timpani, and I'm gonna prepare it, and I'm gonna have this huge multiple setup behind me, and like, yeah, I remember as a right out of high school coming in and see. I think maybe like you did like an opening concert for the studio or something, and you played, and I was just sitting there like, what have I gotten myself into? Like I had just been like the month before that I was doing marching band stuff. Like so that was my first real introduction to college was dealing with Ohio State marching band. Again, wouldn't trade it for the world, but that was what I thought college music was. And I walk into this room and I'm like, all right, cool. What is happening? And then we did like after that we did like a 2 hour long triangle masterclass, and you were like obsessing with us all about like the different types of harmonics you can get out of the triangle depending on where you hit it, and I was just like, I think I've made a huge mistake. you know, um, not because
you
of
didn't
like. Sorry, go ahead.
you, you didn't run away exactly, but
No,
I'm
well, I
glad.
I didn't I didn't know what I was supposed to know, and I didn't know what any of this was. I had just seen my high school percussion teacher Joan Wenzel playing music for a living and talking about steel drums, and I was like, well, I guess that's what I should do. That sounds awesome. And so
Yeah.
and I'm curious just because you said something about yourself as a student. The sort of like going through, it wasn't until your junior year where you really sort of drilled down on what you were going to do. Like, has your approach to teaching how has your approach to teaching changed as you see different generations of students come in, sort of some of us all dealing with the same problems, no matter whether they were like Michael Bump in 1981 or Josh Quillen in 2000 or 1999? Like there's a sense, no matter how confident you are in your little pool, that when you get into this new one, you are lost for a second. And I
Yeah.
don't exactly know
Yeah.
when. I think it might have been when you left after my freshman year. I think was the sort of come to Jesus moment I had to have with myself. And I'm curious, like, how has your approach to teaching students changed over the years of seeing yourself in them, but also sort of being like, yeah, but I got away with that because of X, Y, and Z, and I know you're not going to get away with it. Like how have you adjusted your teaching over time?
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I was just looking at this while we're chatting.
Yeah, you did.
You remember that?
I do. Yeah, yeah. that's
Brought that with me this morning.
that's my high school
Yeah.
signature. What does
Yeah.
it say? What is?
I won't read it, but there's all your handwriting from way back in the day. That was
Oh
your
my
a
God.
thank you note after your audition
I will do my
as an
utmost to
intern.
live up to your expectations. Yes.
And boy, if there was ever an understatement, you
Well,
have done that times a million.
well, it's
That's for sure.
well, I don't know. I don't know if I've asked my question clearly enough, but like what I'm now a teacher and I've been teaching now for 17 years and I think back a lot to those first days at Ohio State, my first days at Akron, my first time in a pan yard, my first time in Trinidad, my first time in percussion walking on stage with those guys and sort of like being aware of the responsibility I have as a teacher for these students who are coming in for their first day and being like,
Mm-hmm.
how do I not mess these kids up? How do I set them
Well,
up? Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I'll tell you. I mean, over time, and I guess it's only because of allowing yourself to let time teach you to become the teacher, and that is that if as long as you constantly, and this takes a while for it took a while for me to redefine what it is to be a teacher, to be teaching somebody, and that is in fact it's sort of an oxymoron, really, isn't it? I mean that if we consider ourselves the student and the other person or the group of people that we're with, they're also students. We're all learning something together. And
Mm-hmm.
from my perspective, I'm sort of leading the discussion, but I'm learning how to communicate the same things that I'm already familiar with in a different way, maybe a different language altogether, but certainly a different inflection,
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of ways. So, even if it's either learning the fundamentals on some level in a private lesson, or it's learning a new work that we're working with a large percussion group, or something in between, there's always a different way to look at it. But if you don't take it quite so, I'm the authoritarian figure and you're the apprentice learning figure here, and you sort of like define these very rigid roles, and then you just come into the group and you just okay, what are you going to? I do it this way, and you may well do this too. Is that pretty much every lesson I come into, I always just say, what are you going to teach me today? I always ask them, what are you going to teach me today? And I always do come away having learned something that I didn't think about before. Even if it's something I know, I've learned to look at it in a different light. I've learned to say it in a different language, not verbally, but
Mm-hmm.
musically. I've reconsidered the vehicle, the voice that we're practicing or working on that particular day. I've learned to reevaluate and reassess what is the sound of this and what is happening at this moment. And am I listening to it in a stereotypical, preconditioned way that I've grown accustomed over the years, or am I listening to it with new ears? You
How
know,
how do you one of the I'm sorry if the podcast turns into me just asking for teaching advice from you, but like what
I'm learning.
one of the things I have found the hardest to do is like at least where I'm at. I'm 43 now. I've taught just enough to know to be dangerous, but I've taught just also enough to know I don't know anything, and I've got a long road to hoe here. I feel like I'm trying to get better at being like my bedside manner, like if I was an oncologist, right? You got to somebody, I see my students sometimes as patients. They come to me and they say, "I want to be in a percussion quartet," or "I want to do what you're doing, which is play steel drums and drill steel bands in Trinidad." Okay, let me take a look at your body and see, let me see you, oh my God, you have cancer. And like
Yeah,
I don't know how to tell
yeah.
someone they have stage 4 cancer right now. And I don't even know if that's my responsibility as a teacher, but I do sometimes feel like I've also been grateful, like those moments with you. I think when you looked me in the face and you were like, if you're not taking this triangle sound really seriously, then this is going to be a rough profession for you. Like, because it's not only just the triangle. There's the tambourine, there's the pandero, there's the tenor pan, there's the tabla. Like, there's all these things. And I remember that being a tiny little come to Jesus moment of where I had to accept something. And Larry Snyder gave, Bob Van Sice certainly gave that to me, but Bugsy Sharp did too. And so did Liam Teague, and so did Mia Gormandy. Like, How have you gotten better at delivering the bad news, or do you just deliver the bad news and feel less bad about it because it's your job?
Well, Gary Cook has a great way of sort of addressing that question. I thought anyway. He does it in his teaching percussion book all the way through,
Mm-hmm.
and that is, turn it around on the student. Ask them, you know, what does this feel like for you? That's always a question that Gary seems to come back to. Well, what does this feel like to you? How do you see this? How does this feel inside when you do this? X, Y, or Z. And I guess if you sort of take that approach to them, you're just being asking them to be honest with themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here's what we want to do. Here's how I produce it. Here's how I would recommend producing it anyway. And let's try it. And if it's within reach, or if we can make modifications based on who you are as an individual, because you have to respect the individual with this. There's a new way of maybe hearing this in the ways that you hadn't thought of. So if you keep yourself open as a teacher for that, then you can hear adaptability, potential for adaptability. But if it's beyond hope, if it's the stage four situation, as you say, then I've just asked the question to the student, okay, now knowing what we know after our time, what do you feel? How do you feel? And 9 times out of 10, maybe 9.7 out of 10, they always come to Jesus with this when they say, I don't see it happening for me either. I see the road before me. I
Mm-hmm.
see what's happening right now. And I don't see myself moving down this path in a successful way, not in the way I think success should be defined in music,
Mm-hmm.
as a performer or as a teacher or whatever I want to do with this. And and then I say, okay, well, we've still had a great time and we still learned from each other. And let's, if you want to remain not as a major, so if this was like trying to determine a major or not. Okay, so you're not a major. Let's remain active. You can still play, right? You can still play pan. You can still play hand drums. You can still play in the chamber group, and let's work it and tailor it to your fortes and find happiness, find grace in what you're doing. It's not a loss.
Yeah.
You're not a loser, man. It's just find where your strengths are and capitalize on it that way.
I think what you just said at the end really, there was a green flag that popped up in my head, like something that I think I've always felt, and I've tried to express it different ways every year to students, is like, I don't actually have an interest in you being a professional musician at all. Like, I don't wake up every day with this, like, oh my God, I hope Steve and John become, professional steel drummers. Like, I hope that you become a professional human being so that you can survive in whatever world you run into. Like, the stuff you're learning here is how to collaborate with people, how to admit your own weaknesses, how to pit your weaknesses up against somebody else's strengths so that the two of you can get through the next 34 bars. Like, there are all these, and then how that applies to the boardroom, how that applies to accounting, how that applies to gardening or whatever else it is you're going to do. I
Yeah,
think I think for me, where I'm at right now is, maybe this is my point, is like, I'm having a real insecure moment as a teacher just at 43 of like, especially post pandemic, we talked a little bit about that, where a lot of the sort of field was changed, just bulldozed for a second, where like no stages were occupied. Everybody's on Zoom, everybody's streaming concerts, everybody's editing videos so it looks amazing, you got a nice background.
yeah, right.
Now when people are, I'm noticing a little bit of some symptoms of that. Like, again, talking about the stage, like, I think there's a lot of stage one cancers where people are coming out of the pandemic being like, man, I got a little lower back pain, but I'll push through it, take some Tylenol. And then 3 years later, they're like, that was prostate cancer. Oh my God, what were you doing? And there's enough of that. And again, I have the same things. I'm not saying this to be glib or presume that I'm immune to this. I have my own trauma from that, but I'm very insecure. Like, I see this thing and I just want to be like, you all need to, you need to have a hard moment of like, sorry, you're not going to be streaming your concerts for the rest of your life, and you don't know how to practice actually, and I need to show you how to do that. So like, I'm curious for you, like, did you ever have any moments, or what were the moments for you of like deep insecurity as a teacher, and like, where you really had, did you ever have to go back and sort of be like, I got to start over, I got to retool the way I'm seeing this was a complete disaster?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Every day. I'm always thinking,
Oh
I
no,
am
Michael! I
really.
was hoping to look forward to something a little less painful.
I mean, this is year 37 for me. So I mean, I'm still learning. I'm absolutely learning. That's the absolute truth that I can tell you. The other absolute truth I can tell you, I guess, is that the real big thing that I've learned in this profession and in life is that the only constant is change.
Hmm.
You know, the only constant in our lives is change. I mean, Cage was right. That's the truth of it.
Hmm.
So if you can open yourself up to that, to that reality and not resist it, not fear it, but embrace it and use it as a tool, as a vehicle for moving forward in life,
Hmm.
then all things come together. I think a little easier in the arts, in going to Hy-Vee or the grocery store at Kroger or Walmart or whatever. I mean, driving down the street, man. I mean, everything's by chance, but ultimately, if you can just kind of relax yourself and loosen it to the point that hey, this was cool. This was meant to be. I've learned something, and I'm growing as a person. So when I lay my head down at night, I'm a little different than I woke up this morning, and I'm good with that. Maybe it was a really pissy day on some level, but whatever. There's going to be another pissy day down the road, and that's okay. I can work with that. But I'll tell you, back in the days when I was teaching at Ohio State, you know, obviously being I was younger, but I was wound tighter than a clock back then. And I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted everything to run on time. All the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed, and I didn't want to screw up at all. So if I had a bad lesson with somebody, if I didn't have a good speaking day, in the lesson or something, or in the rehearsal, or whatever, I wasn't playing well in a studio class. I was thinking, that's it. I've got to get out of here. I'm at Ohio State. I'm not worthy. You
Hmm.
know,
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm just not worthy of doing this. And what am I doing here? Things like that. But I just had to kind of grow into and grow into life and realize that you can't be perfect all the time. And you can't be perfect to everybody, to all
Hmm.
people, all the time. You hear these cliches every day, but you really have to accept the reality of that and interpret it for your own, to make it work for you. So I guess that's what I've just done. I've just sort of learned to say, I'm going to learn something today from these students, even if it's something I already know. I'm going to look at it differently today.
Well,
You
I
know,
think about that year at Ohio State. As you're talking and sort of explaining your worldview, I'm also becoming immediately aware of how little time you and I actually spent together in the scope of your professional life and my professional life. Like I only had a year with you, and my
this is
second year,
true.
there was I think Michael Uda had come in to teach, but he was only teaching some doctoral students, and I want to just go on the record here and say that I think that year, those 2 years in particular, but that year of guidance from you and then the sort of void for a year, I actually genuinely want to thank you for what that forced me to do. Had that year not gone the way it did, I wouldn't be in So Percussion. I wouldn't have been involved with Steel Pan. I'm not saying I would have been a drug addict and been in the gutters, behind a dumpster every night sleeping, but that year of sort of being my first studio, and then sort of having a gun held to my head a little bit the second year and being like, what am I going to do? How am I going to do this?
Yeah.
It changed my life in many respects, and I wanted to just personally go on the record and say like thank you for your time, and I wish that we'd have had more time together. And
Yeah.
I think of that year also just like these little things sort of click into place of like, oh, if I don't do this on my own, if I don't play with Andy and Rudy tonight at 2 in the morning, and then go stagger into theory class and sleep through theory, no one's ever gonna let me play in a percussion trio. Like that was sort of like that was the calculation my 19-year-old brain made, and I was like, well, fuck it, I guess that's what I got to do, and I just started doing it. And I was talking with Russ Hartenberger the other night about stuff similar to this, and he said he was sort of being like, man, you want to know what's harder than starting a percussion group? Ending one. And he's like, it is so stressful to like call New York State and be like, we need to close our taxes. You know, next is, you know, we're, you know, and so anyway, it's like for me as a kid looking to them, seeing this thing, it just seems so obvious and inevitable. Like, man, Russ, Gary, Bob, all those guys, they had somebody hold a gun to their head in some way at some point in their life, which made it clear to them that the only way it was going to happen is if they did it themselves. And
Yeah.
anyway, take all of that for what it's worth. I just really wanted to put it out there in the world that like I would not trade that time at Ohio State for anything. It is literally one of the reasons I'm sitting where I'm sitting. So there's no question.
Well,
I just wanted to say that out
you
loud.
know, I mean, reflection is always, you know, an easy thing
Mm-hmm.
to try to define, I guess, after the fact. But I can say with absolute certainty that I can remember first meeting you and your mom, and you know, checking out Ohio State. And I can remember the audition, the whole bit. And I remember hearing about your interests and your passions. You were a serious dude, you know. I mean, even back then, you may have not known exactly what you want to do down to the, you know, the hue of the color of your life, but you had an agenda, man. You knew that, you know, whatever you were going to do, you were going to take it seriously. And it may change, it probably will, but you'll roll with it, you'll figure it out, but you're going to take this really, really seriously. So that was just who you were, and you probably still are today, you know, to a fair degree. But I was, and I was always admiring that, and I knew, man, if I could spend some time with this human being, I think we can make something really, really beautiful happen as an artist. I think that, you know, this is what you want to do. You may not know exactly what you want to do with it, but you had a sense of it. And, you know, this to me, I took great pride in, you know, sort of welcoming you into this world, but watching you then matriculate well after I was out of the picture. I mean, you, Andy, you know, Rudy, all those guys, you know, we're going to make it happen on one level or another. I just knew it. I felt it. And like you, I mean, in these 37 years of time, there have been pockets, and there continue to be pockets
Mm-hmm.
of students that are just like that. I just had actually lunch day before yesterday with another former student, a Truman student, Megan Arns.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah. Dr. Megan Arns, excuse you.
I should say, yes, I
The
stand
record saying.
corrected. This is true. And so you know, we had time to kind of reminisce and catch up on things like that. But, you know, she was part of another pocket of students. She and Adam Groh and a bunch of other Truman students, alumni that, you know, have already shown themselves in a positive way professionally. But you could see it from the first meeting, from the first day they stepped on the stage in honor band from high school with Megan, you know, for example. But you just know it, and you were among those types of people. There was a block, a crowd that moved in like manner, you know, a flock, if you will, that you knew somehow they were going to flesh themselves out as artists, either professionally, I mean, making a paycheck out of it, or not. Didn't sort of that was sort of an irrelevant thing, but they were going to find themselves as artists, and indeed you found your voice. And there's not a day that goes by, Josh Quillen, that I don't remember how proud and I continue to be of you. It's absolutely true.
Well,
You're making it happen, man.
it warms my heart, and I there's not a day that goes by I don't think about you and every one of my teachers. But you know, the one thing, just to speak to what you were talking about, I think the one thing I was imminently aware of from day one at Ohio State, and I would say the marching band had a lot to do with this, because the military aspect, the militaristic, and you were in drum corps, so you can identify with this on some level. Like, but the way that Ohio State marching band was run was very like a military. You had uniform inspections. You had the chair steps, like the whole 9 yards. You know.
Yeah.
And I was not a super in shape person, like, you know, but you had to be in shape to do that stuff. I never played traditional snare drum that well. Like, my rudiments weren't all that great. But the one thing it forced you to do is like, well, if you're going to get in this band, you're going to have to work harder than everybody else. And so I was like, well, okay, I guess that's what I got to do. You know, like, I'll get in there, and it's like, it's not that my paradiddles ever got better than anybody else's. I just worked hard enough to sound as good as I needed to get into that band and to survive in that band. I get to Ohio State percussion studio. I see Andy Beal, and he's just like his hands are moving a million miles a minute, and I'm just like, if I'm going to play with this guy, I'm going to have to practice 4 more hours than he does. All right, I guess that's what I have to do, So off to McDonald's I go, and then back to the practice room, And it wasn't it wasn't like there was this desire to be a solo musician. I was just trying to keep my head above water, Michael.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear
Like
you.
I was drowning around with people who could play circles around me, and I had never drowned before. I'd never been in that deep water, so and but there was a big support network there.
But you had the self discipline
Hmm.
to, to make yourself work in that environment. Some people don't. Some people are scared off by it. They're too intimidated, and
Hmm.
they look for something else that's a little less, intimidating, I guess. But you had, and you continue to, I'm sure, have that self discipline. That's just part of your DNA. You're wired that way, So you made it work because your personality, your self discipline, carried you through that,
Well, I think some of
and
it
you
too.
adapt.
Yeah, and I think some of it too is in you did this, Larry did this, Bob did this. Like the stakes are actually fairly low for pushing through that intimidation. Like you think there's a big scary wolf on the other side. What there is a marimba solo. And it's
Yeah,
like you could
yeah,
work hard and do that, and if you get out there and miss some notes, no one's gonna die. Like just miss less notes next time.
there
And
it
so it's
is.
like
There
once you
it
get
is.
to the playing Carnegie Hall, like yeah, I want to play a sold out show at Carnegie Hall. I've now done 6. It's not scary.
Yeah,
It's just another wood paneled floor like any other stage at Truman State or the University of Akron. And I was like, oh wait,
yeah.
that's all this was? Oh, what was I scared about? And then it's like, well, now I want to play a stadium. I want to see how scary that is. Now I'll bet I'd get in front of Giant Stadium and be like, well, this is cool, but kind of really can't see anybody, and it's just all loud, and well, that wasn't very fun.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, that's growth over time, man, isn't it? I mean, isn't that what it is? It's growth over time, and you just learn that this is part of life, and it's not to be feared; it's to be embraced, and it's not a, what it is. I mean, ego doesn't allow us to open these doors for us too often. We're too worried about centricity, self-centeredness, and we're worried about how people interpret and view us. We're worried about what other people think. As an artist, like that's man, that's the cancer, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
you can't worry about what other people think. You've got to just what's in there, express it, do it. Don't worry about it. It's not about everybody else. It's about the individual. What do you have to say? And you know, I mean, if you can get to that point as an artist and as a human being,
Hmm.
regardless of what you're doing, really. But if you can get to that point where, as an individual, you feel comfortable in your own skin and completely express, what you feel, then that's you've arrived, man. I mean, I think that's life, right?
Well, it's also like when you're talking about like, well, you shouldn't care about what other people think. And my therapist actually called me out on this a while ago. Like, she was just like, you do realize that nobody thinks this. You think they think this, so it's really what you think about what you're doing. And I'm like,
Bingo.
oh my god. So like stop blaming it on what other people think. That's actually what you think, and you need to get over that shit because
Yeah.
you're questioning everything about what you're doing. And again, the stakes are low. So like, all right, I want to record a steel drum solo. All right, do it. What if you just recorded another one? What if then you
That's
recorded
an
another one?
absolute. That's an absolute truth. That is an absolute truth. And it's taken me a long journey. And, yeah, and in a lot of eyes, in my own eyes, I screwed up a lot along the way. I
Mhm.
made some poor choices, but then I worked from those. Everybody does. Everybody, that's life. Nothing is a perfect science. But if you take the moment, take the opportunity to embrace it and learn, grow, expand, become the individual that you are and be able to be freely expressing it, then that was a good moment. That wasn't a negative moment. It was actually a very good moment, because you've learned something from it. So, go forth and conquer, my friend. That's the way it works.
Well, let me ask you, just out of respect for your time here, I just have like one more question for you. Where do you see? I mean, I think I would have, when I joined SOA 17 years ago, we had ideas of what we felt was missing from the percussion world. There wasn't a whole lot of percussion chamber music rep being developed regularly. There was a lot of chunks like Steve Reich's stuff, Zanakis' stuff. Then there's a bunch of paranoia. There's pockets of things, but it wasn't like there was a constant stream of stuff happening, and so we really wanted to change that, and so we got in there and started commissioning a lot of works. I think there's ideas about where I felt like the steel drum world was going, and in general, like the path has been in that direction, but it's totally different than what I imagined. But like for you, Michael Bump, today, sitting here on December 23rd, what has surprised you about where the percussion world is going, and where do you personally, like today, you're going to plant your flag and be like, this is where it's headed? Just and I know it's a hypothetical, but like, where do you think it's going?
Percussion is still undefined. I don't know that there's a specific direction that it wants to go or that it is going, but I do think, again, it's an overused word, but I think the potential is phenomenal about what the percussive arts has in front of it, what's in the windshield of percussion performance and education and composition. It used to be in my younger days that the concept of integrating electronics with percussion, for example, was in absolute infancy. It had just been born, basically. And it was awkward, it was cumbersome. The concept of it required 2 PhDs in electrical acoustics. You couldn't really do it on your own. You had to have a team of 20 people to try to help you perform this work with timpani and electronic accompaniment or something. Putting on Jean Pichet's Steal the Thunder was like an act of God. You had to bring this entourage of stuff to make it work most of the time. Reel-to-reel tapes, the whole bit. But today, thank God, the technology has opened so many doors. Even just the nature of commissioning a person to write a work for percussion. Nobody, hesitates to ask, could I ask you to consider a work for tabla and electronic accompaniment, electronic environment or something like that? Oh yeah, I've had all kinds of experience. Sure, I can do that. When do you need it? This is not a ridiculous request from a commissioner. And so, the potential of new music in percussion performance is like it's never been, and it probably tomorrow it'll be even more so. So that to me is incredibly exciting. What's going on in composition for percussion, both as a solo vehicle as well as a chamber voice. Sky's the limit, man. And isn't that the great thing about what we do, though? You could wake up at the age of 92. Hopefully we both do someday. And we wake up and we go, oh my gosh, I have not learned how to play mridangam. I've got to go. Sorry, I've got to jump out of bed, skip the coffee. I've got to find one. How do I learn this? Where do I go?
Played my first parang steel drum piece the other night. I was like, oh my God, what have I been doing? This is all in 6/8 with a 12/8 bell pattern under it. Like, this is awesome.
Oh, as an aside, we just played for our holiday show. We had a Christmas tunes, obviously, but we played Las Colinas. This piece?
Yeah, Tristan.
Based off Parang piece. Yeah. I was thinking similar styles.
It's very. Yeah, that's absolutely Parang. Yeah.
That's a beautiful, beautiful piece, and it works so festively, with the program. But anyway, I digress. But just the enthusiasm for playing has never been finer. Never been more intense as far as I can feel it. And that, coupled with the fact that the education of students is the net has been cast so wide, and the accessibility of, again, technology and learning things, if it's YouTube or if it's some other vehicle through the computer, and the immediacy of that information. If you can filter out that which is primary from that which is secondary or not even accurate, given that element of the equation, the accessibility to information is unparalleled. Yeah. So students are learning at younger ages, and they're retaining more because it's in their faces 24/7, for better or worse. It's there, and so the retention of information is there, and they're learning quicker, and they're adapting to performing. The idea of performing, they're not as intimidated at performance because they feel they've got more information and abilities within them, both mentally and physically, than they ever have before. So the new generations coming up are less intimidated about the idea of experimentation and about getting out there and performing.
Mm, mm,
That's exciting. That to me is energizing too. You can see it through PAS or WGI or any other vehicles that we're familiar with, or even new vehicles that we're not familiar with.
mm,
And you guys are part of that as anybody else. I mean, the nature of working on new works and stepping outside the box. Getting out there and presenting pieces in new environments, not just the pieces themselves, but the environments themselves
mm,
being new and creative. Your audiences, you're casting a wider net to audiences. It's not so specific or
yeah.
cliche, in terms of your audience. It's that sort of thing is going to take us to the next level.
One of the, I mean,
That's the
that's,
kind of thing.
I mean, it's one of the things I'm encouraging my students to think about right now. But I think evolutionarily speaking, it's kind of hard for them to do this. I mean, I didn't start thinking like this until now, but like, what are the things that you track now as being like, man, this should not be the way it is? Where can you actually affect that change, and how patient can you be to wait and see where that change yields 10 years down the road? And when I was in school, I remember the four of us in SO sitting around being like, why is everybody only playing for the PASIC crowd? Like, that's my grandma's not going to come to PASIC, and nobody pays to go there. Nobody. I mean, you don't get paid to play PASIC. So, what are we going to do about that? Like,
Yeah,
How are we going to play for people outside of that? And so then you have to start talking to people that aren't percussionists, which forces you to have to talk to people like you're not a nerd percussionist. Like, you actually have to explain things to a human being who has no context for why you're playing a pitched flower pot. They're just like, I have a flower pot, and then then you've got to convince them to come back a second time. And I would say that is something that's changed. For me too, something that always felt weird was the idea that, like, you have a tenor pan sitting behind you, the idea that there was percussion, and then there was the world musics, and then there was
yeah,
orchestra. And there was a part of me that's just like, wait a minute, I mean, Europe's part of the world, shouldn't we consider orchestra world music? Like,
yeah,
I don't know, the violin used to be a folk instrument, still is in most of the world. Like, what if we just called
yeah,
that a world music ensemble too? And then what if we gave the orchestra the same funding that the steel band got? Like, and so, like, but like that to me is the sort of weird uncanny valley that I still perceive in the education system and also in the general public. Like, it's not like Carnegie Hall's putting on massive tabla concerts, because the mass public is probably going to come see the Rockettes before they're going to see, but that's just where we're at right now. And so, like, I would love to see our students that are coming up now somehow change that in the way that you've changed your field, the way that SO has attempted to change our field. But it's something I wasn't always tracking as a student. It was just sort of like, that's weird that we're only playing for PASIC. And then you sort of like move on with your life and you don't think about what you can actually do to change that.
yeah. You have to ask the question, why do we exist, right? I mean, are we existing for PAS, or are we existing for? Is there another reason why we even come together at all?
Mm-hmm.
I remember doing an interview years ago. This was like early '90s, before Ohio State. I think I was still at Old Miss actually,
Mm-hmm.
and I had the guys down to do like a 3 or 4 day residency on campus. And part of that, I put together an interview for PAS, or percussive notes, that particular year, and it was just by chance. We were talking over lunch one day, and I put a cassette tape recorder and press spread, and that was that. So made that an interview. But one of the things that came out of that is, why do I remember asking the question to John, who was obviously alive still at the time, and I said, why do you guys exist? And he said, we exist for ourselves. He said, we exist for ourselves. We play for ourselves. We enjoy the communication that we share with each other. We started out as an improvisational gathering. We just took the collection of instruments and sound sources that we owned, in and around, the Rochester area that they were at the time. And we would just gather and set things up, put them on the floor, put them on the table, put them on the wall, whatever. And we would just listen to what each other had to say. And these improvisations, these fantasias would have just materialized. And that was the birth of Nexus. We started to codify them in different ways, but
Yeah.
we definitely created for ourselves and for our own interests at all. And those who are interested will come. But at that time maybe it was a little different. But at least where you're concerned, you guys seem to be very interested in absolutely creating your own vehicle and your own voice through many of the same ways, the Genesis ways that Nexus probably adapted. But the tailor of this is that for you guys, it seems that you're listening and aware of a larger communal global audience, that they're as valid as learned percussionists, as learned teachers and pedagogues and all this. You're not just there for that. You're there for the world. You're there for the community that we exist in and live in at large. And for that you play. For them you play. You perform. And I think that's yeah, right. Right on. I mean,
I
that's
grew.
beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, talking with Russ the other night. He was saying, I was just asking him, like, at the tail end of your time with Nexus, like, what are y'all playing? And he's like, we're going back to improvs. We're just doing all improv shows again. And there's a tiny part of me that felt like, the idea that after an evolution, a lifetime of 40 or 50 years of playing with each other, you just land right back where you started. And I'm like, yeah, I kind of hope the same. I don't know what that's going to look like for maybe in 40 years while we're doing is playing amid the noise and barely being able to play so-called laws of nature, and maybe that's what we end up doing. but but I think for everybody, I just think for anybody who's coming up, Nexus didn't start because a government grant from Canada. It started because Russ and John and Robin and all those guys got in a room the first day and started doing things. And then the next morning, Russ texted or called or wrote a letter to to Robin and was like, "You guys want to do it again on Tuesday?" And they did it again on Tuesday. And now here we are. It's like history is not made in years; it's made in days. And Nexus has been around for 40,000 days or whatever 50 years is. More than that. I mean, it's days, and that's the thing that's hard to impart on students. And I'm just grateful for whatever you said to 19-year-old Josh Quillen, that sort of made my brain go kirk, 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 and like sort of see the world as something that I had to hold on to and actually ride rather than wait for the bus to come pick me up. Like something you said, something in the class of people that you surrounded me with. That's teaching too. Surrounding your students with other good students is part of teaching.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And to expound on that, I got to say that, for prospective students, when they come in and they ask me, so what's Truman's percussion program like and all this, and I said, well, I learn a lot. I said, I come in here and I learn a lot from them. And in turn, they learn from each other. And I said, and it's not a stretch of truth to say that they probably learn more from each other than they do from me on any given day, because the family is tight. You know what that's like. You've got a studio of like-minded individuals, or they've been sort of crafted in that mindset, but their enthusiasm for what they do in the halls, in the practice rooms, in the rehearsal rooms, is infectious. And the next day they want to learn more and they want to soak in more. But the point is that they learn from each other absolutely as much, if not more so, most days than they do from me. I'm just hanging out, but it's just really a beautiful thing to listen to them, and then to listen to them in the way that they channel that enthusiasm, that information. So oftentimes it manifests it manifests itself in the form of rehearsal, where we're taking a particular section. We had a particular agenda in mind for a chamber rehearsal that day. And I have an idea in my mind about how I want this interpretation to go. This is the landscape. This is the acoustical landscape that I'd like to hear in this particular section. So I go into the rehearsal with that idea for my coaching. And in turn, they've got a altogether different idea. And so I listen to this and, right then I just like bite my tongue. I don't say what I was going to say. I say, man, that's cool. Could you guys flesh that out just a little bit more and go back to this, this, and this? And then, what I was going to say never materializes.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the language, isn't it? I mean, you just let them for, because now they have onus. They own that piece now. It's no longer a piece by Bud Basilon or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
They own the piece. They're just transmitting, they're interpreting the information, the data, and now it becomes, the Truman Graduate Quartet, piece, or
Well,
so percussion,
it
whatever.
sort of, you're speaking to it. I mean, teaching is a two-way street. I mean, there's days where you are responsible for all the energy in the room because of whatever happened that day. It's like, okay, my job today is to do the heavy lift. But then sometimes when your students come in and they do the heavy lift, like, I'm actually a better teacher. My job is actually to help them craft the way they make ideas and the way they have ideas. Like, that's super fun as a teacher. It's the days when I have to come in and do the heavy lift where I'm like, I just want you all to know how unfun this is to do this heavy lift. Like, there's a great, I don't know if you were at the John Beck retirement party at PASIC years ago. After he was retiring from Eastman, they threw like a reception for him, and he got up and gave a toast. And he said, a lot of you say I'm not the most inspirational teacher. And he's like, just so you know, you all didn't kill it every day either. Or like, you weren't the most inspiring every day either. And he was like, I'm looking at you, Gad. It's like even Steve Gadd came in as a student some days and was just like, I didn't practice anything and I got nothing, and so John Beck had to do the heavy lift with Steve Gadd.
Yeah.
And he's like, I just wanted you to know that was not fun. Teaching Steve Gadd was not fun that day, and it's like, yeah, that's, as a teacher, that's totally true. And I wish as a student I would have been more aware of that, because I would have come to the table. I was afraid to come to the table with ideas sometimes, especially with Bob. I remember being like, no, I do not bring an idea to the table with Bob because I'm just going to get flamethrowered. Well, as it turns out, Bob just has a lot of big ideas, a lot of strong ideas, and he's not ashamed to sharpen his axe against yours if you have an idea. But it wasn't until my end of my second year where I started being like, actually, Bob, I don't hear it that way. And he's like, buddy, I think you're wrong and you're an idiot, but I'll let you do that. Then it was like, that was like, oh, wow, okay, that's what, and then I joined So Percussion, and those three guys are constantly forcing you to have to, like, defend your thesis every day of your life. So,
yeah.
Anyway, Michael, sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, it just compels you to solidify your convictions. So if you do believe in a certain path or a certain sound or a landscape, or then defend it. How so? Don't just say that, but tell me why. Prove it through your sound, your voice. And then I'll either still disagree with you, or I'll allow you the opportunity because you have a conviction to that sound, to that path.
But your disagreement,
which is cool, because
but your disagreement is going to be logged in the public record, and then you can do with it. Like, I just like, take all my information, use it or don't, but I want the public record to show that I have given you this data.
That's right.
Whether you use it or not is another story, but I want it to be shown that I told you that I did not think this was a good idea.
So 15 years from now, we will talk about this again. You just don't know when. That's that sort of thing. But
yeah. Well, Michael, this has been really, really fun, and I hope to do it again soon. Please, thank you so much for your time. Where can you just real quickly give folks, like, is there a place where they can find out more about the studio at Truman State and sort of what you're up to now?
Yeah, Facebook's always a great vehicle. We have a website. The Truman Percussion Program has its own website up there on Facebook. I have Facebook stuff there. And they can always just contact me directly here within the Department of Music. I've got the email thing going on and everything else. So the usual vehicles, the usual tools. If anybody wants to chat or whatever, this is where I'm at. So sure.
Awesome.
I think that's all I needed to say about that.
Okay. Yeah. All right, great. Well, Michael, thank you so much for your time. Have a good holiday break and get some rest. And I hope that we can cross paths again here. I don't think I've seen you post-pandemic in person yet. And I would love to get together and cheers and catch up in person.
Josh, you too, man. I can't tell you how fun this has been. And I don't want to over express it, but I really am so very proud of you, not to sound condescending, but it's just so proud of what you've done and finding your voice in the world. And you and many, many other students, of course, too. But thank you for your music, is all I'll tell you. It's just thank you very much for your music.
You are quite welcome, and I thank you. I feel like my life, I'm like one of those disco balls that, like, I was a blank disco ball at the beginning, and then my mom put a little reflective square on it, and then Joan Wenzel put one on it, then Larry Snyder, then you put one on it, then Cliff Alexis, and now I'm spinning, and I don't have it all filled up yet, but I'm really grateful to have had the people in my life who have helped to sort of pinball me in a path. And so, from the bottom of my heart, thank you, Michael. Have a safe holiday break, and we'll talk soon. All right.
All right, man. Be well. It's great to see you, Josh.
Likewise. Take it easy. All right.
All right, cool. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. This podcast is brought to you by Liquid Drum, liquiddrum.com down in Waco, Texas. My good friend Todd Meehan runs an amazing percussion company down there. Great merch, great content. Check him out, liquiddrum.com. Also, Kyle Dunleavy, dunleavypans.com, DUNLEAVY pans.com. Kyle Dunleavy makes and builds all the steel drums that I perform and teach on, in So Percussion, as well as at NYU and Princeton. He's an amazing tuner builder, just a really nice guy, very dependable. Check him out. If you are interested at all in steel pan advocacy, want to learn more about the goings-on in pan in Brooklyn, check out paninmotion.com. My good friend Kendall Williams, Jerry Guy, Trisha Guy, and Arisha John run an amazing organization called paninmotion.com. Check them out. And finally, Alejandro Mirage runs an amazing clothing apparel company in Brooklyn that is steel pan centric. You can check him out at mangochow, CHOW, clothing.com. I own a bunch of his shirts. They're amazing, very stylish, beautifully made. Check them out. mangochowclothing.com. Okay, hope you're well. Talk to you soon. Bye.